He's authored 3 books on gamification, including the newest one, which is just coming out, The Gamification Revolution, How Leaders Leverage Game Mechanics to Crush the Competition. So you should pick that up. He blogs for sites like Huffington Post and Mashable, has given numerous talks, including a really great TED Talk for TEDx Brussels titled How Games Make Kids Smarter. I'm excited to have Gabe here because gamification is coming more and more recognized as an important aspect of learning, especially here in Google. But as we know, with great power comes great responsibility. So I think we're very lucky to have Gabe here and to share his experiences with us. So please welcome Gabe Zichermann.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. I'm super excited to be here for the second Google Talk. It's always nice to have the Google food and drink the Google water and so on. Just not the Kool-Aid. I noticed there's no Kool-Aid. So talking about gamification, put this in context first. So I was born in 1974. And 1974, in addition to being the year that I was born, which is an auspicious enough occasion for us to care, is also more or less the time that the modern video game industry kind of gets up and running. And it wasn't more than a few short years later that my immigrant parents thought, I think this computer thing is going to be big someday, and so maybe we should get Gabe a computer. And they bought me my first VIC-20. It was my first computer, VIC-20, 1982. And very shortly thereafter, I learned my first lesson in computing when the Commodore 64 came out like 4 weeks later, after I bought my VIC-20, making it obsolete. But like so many people with their first computers, I'm sure many of you can relate to this, I almost immediately went off in search of the games that I could play with my VIC-20, which came mostly in cartridge or cassette tape form, which was actually a form in which software was once delivered. And it wasn't long after that that I started wanting to learn how to make those games that were part of that experience with the computer. And I started with type-in game books like these, which Usborne books, which some of you might be familiar with, and eventually graduated to writing some from game programming books. And games became an ever larger part of my life, as with so many of us on the who grew up in that first generation of kind of contemporary gamers, all the way through to college, where I became obsessed with this game called Civilization, which I'm sure has ensnared some of you and your loved ones. I played about 8,000 hours of Civilization, give or take, during my undergraduate years. I also managed to graduate with a degree, but I spent a lot of time playing this game. And so I took that as part of my passion with games when I found myself working in the networking industry for a few years, and joined the games industry. And I started off working on the Game Developers Conference, Gamasutra Game Developer Magazine, which are the 3 main kind of trade outlets in the game space, and did cool things like helped launch the Independent Games Festival, which some of you might be familiar with. And after that, I started a company called Trimedia, which was the first successful digital distribution company in games. So before Steam, this was the company that made that happen. And when we sold the company in 2005, we powered about 4/5 of the world's legitimate game downloads. So if you downloaded a game between 1999 and 2005, thank you so very much. After we sold the company, I had what could best be described as a crisis of conscience. I started to think to myself, look at all the amazing things that games have done. Look at how many people they've entertained and all the success that we've had. Is that all that we'll ever do with them? Is entertainment the sum total of what this powerful medium is capable of accomplishing? And don't get me wrong, I think entertainment is important and meaningful in and of itself. It does not need another purpose to be important to society, but I thought to myself, we could do more. And so I started to research, I started to play around, I started to build sort of apps, and out of that came my first book, Game-Based Marketing, which came out in 2010, and was followed up by the Gamification by Design, which I wrote for O'Reilly, and then now my new book, The Gamification Revolution. And so for the last however many years, about 7 years, I've spent my life devoted to this topic of how to use games to change people's behavior, change the world. I now also edit this site, gamification.co, which is the main site that covers that topic. I run a strategic consultancy called Dopamine, which is the leading group that helps design experiences, meaningful experiences, using gamification engagement science. And as you heard, I'm the chair of Gamification Summit, or G Summit, which is a super awesome event. Some of you will be there. Hopefully, others of you will join us either live or online, looking at sort of the top experts who use this subject area, the power of games, to change behavior in all kinds of spheres. It's happening in San Francisco, and it's at gsummit.com. But going back to my childhood, so games allowed me to do a few things. One of the things that I figured out that very quickly, they allowed me to do was they allowed me to be somebody else and experience things that weren't like normal or natural to my like default state of being. So one of those things was obviously I could sort of be the athlete in games like Decathlon that I couldn't be in my regular life, or the global sleuth in Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which is still one of my favorite games and like endlessly replayable even as an adult. And of course, to the tween boy in me, Leisure Suit Larry gave me some insight into what it would be like to be an adult at some point and have those, and as you know, it's very true to life, and have those experiences. But what I didn't realize at the time, and science only now has caught up to some extent, how significantly those game experiences were rewiring my brain and how significantly they were doing the same to all of you. It turns out that in a couple of key ways, games have a profound effect on the brain and on the mind. And one of those is through the process of what's called intrinsic reinforcement. And basically the way intrinsic reinforcement works is anytime you challenge yourself to something, anything at all, it doesn't matter what it is, good or bad, big or small, and you achieve that thing, your brain secretes a little bit of a magical neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is a pleasure chemical. So challenge, achievement, pleasure. And the interesting thing about that loop is, of course, I think it explains a great deal of what's amazing and also kind of messed up about the world all in one shot, because you can derive pleasure from things which are not objectively good. They don't have to be good in an ethical, moral, or concrete sense for you to derive pleasure out of challenging and achieving that thing. Now, in the real world, the one that we're inhabiting in theory today, we get this dopamine release very infrequently. It doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen regularly. We can't beat our personal best or run our best marathon time over and over and over again. But in the game world, we can deliver that jolt of dopamine by design, sometimes hundreds of times per hour, right? A game is an endless series of little challenges that you then achieve, and then you produce dopamine. And in this loop, in this constant loop, we train ourselves to want that more and more. That's intrinsic reinforcement. We want that release. The second piece of the science that's caught up a little bit is that games can actually make you smarter. And this has been the subject, of some debate. In fact, this research is so contentious that it's taken 10 years of repeatedly demonstrable studies by the same research team to prove that a game can raise people's intelligence. And this game type, this mode is called N-back, the letter N and then back, or dual N-back. It's a kind of game rather than a brand name. And it's been shown to raise your intelligence, your IQ score, by as much as 4 to 5 points by playing this game for as little as 4 weeks. And the halo effect of that rise can last for 6 months or longer. Kind of astounding, right, when you think about it. It's pretty amazing that a game can do that. Now, I will preface this. I will say that N-back or dual N-back's really hard, okay? So it's not an easy game. It's not like Lemonade Stand. Like, you have to actually lean in and do it. And it forms one of the important lessons about the power of games and the power of gamification to change the world. But since that time, since my childhood with games and many of your childhoods with games, the industry's evolved a tremendous amount, right? The games today are almost indistinguishable. They're like, we can't even see them as the same thing as they were 30 some odd years ago. They look amazing. They're capable of astonishing things with incredible power, with incredible clarity, and with incredible sophistication. And at the same time, our behavior, our world has changed substantially from that time 30 years ago, 30 some odd years ago. It doesn't look the same at all as it was before. And I think that those two things are connected. Now, some of us have spent this time imagining and dreaming about ways that these games, this gamer generation, will help save the world. They travel, even today, many of my contemporaries travel around the world telling us how great games will be at solving the world's problems, how they will help us change everything and fix everything that's wrong in the world. But many others seem stuck in a pattern that hasn't changed some 30-odd years. We're still arguing about whether or not games are good or bad. We're still arguing about whether or not they can teach children something, whether they're positive or negative, whether the addiction that results from games is better or worse than other things. Still arguing about that. It's the same conversation. And, of course, the omnipresent question of whether or not games cause violence, which continues to be a major theme in the discussion about games and their role in the world. But I'm struck by something kind of on a repeated basis every time we have this discussion. First of all, I am effing bored as hell of this discussion. I am sick and tired of having this argument with people. It's over, this discussion. I don't want to have it anymore. I don't want to put games or gamers on trial anymore. Why is it that games and gamers are the ones on trial constantly being asked what their purpose is, what purpose they serve in the world, when our stupid, boring, gray, dull, irritating, pointless existences in so many ways are not the things on trial? Why isn't every dull interaction that we have on trial? Why are the things that bring us so much joy, the things that bring us so much engagement, the things that we have so many qualms about? And I'd argue that at the same time, we're on the cusp of something very unusual and interesting, which is, I believe, an actual evolutionary step in humanity. I think we're witnessing the birth of the next human. And these things are connected in my mind. And I'm struck by looking at the rates of, in particular, autism and ADHD. And I don't know, I'm sure many of you have been touched by it. Of course, the stats tell us that many of you have been touched by it, by the immense growth of it over the last 30 years. But in particular now, the stats say that about 1 in every 54 children, male children, has some form of autism spectrum disorder. And over 10% of the American population has some kind of ADHD. And it strikes me that this is very significant. At some point in the near term, this will shift from being something that we pathologize, shift from being something that we medicalize, to being something that will be quite normal. When a sufficient percentage of the population, you can project this graph out, most of you are math nerds, you can project this graph out yourself, just the same way I can. It's not long before these numbers produce a kind of substantial minority of the population that's no longer a pathology, that's no longer an illness, something that needs to be medicated or something that needs to be dealt with, but a substantially different group of people with a substantially different way of viewing the world. And what makes people on the autism spectrum and people with ADHD particularly interesting is that it's not all bad. We think of them as not fitting in and not being able to relate to the world in particular ways, but it turns out that folks with high-functioning autism, things like Asperger's, actually have a higher level of fluid intelligence than the average population. And fluid intelligence, by the way, is different from crystallized intelligence, which is what we typically measure on a kind of standard IQ test. Fluid intelligence is our ability to problem solve in novel situations. It's our ability to, in circumstances where we don't really know anything, where we don't have the knowledge, find solutions to problems, figure our way out of boxes, solve things. And so it's not without observation that there are some upsides, some interesting upsides, and I want to connect those dots. So I started to research the question of this sort of adaptation, and I came across the work of Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Fogel. And Mr. Fogel has spent his life researching a concept called technophysio evolution. And the concept of technophysio evolution is how is it that technology changes our evolution, both our genotype and phenotype evolution. So both our genes and how they are expressed, how that expresses itself in outcomes in the world. This is his area of study. And after doing a life's work, crunching an unbelievable amount of data in his recent kind of research, they've identified that technology has been directly responsible for a very, very significant change in human outcomes. In 1850, the average American man was 5'7" and could expect to live 45 years. In 1980, the average American man was 5'10" and lived to be 75. That time interval, that time span, is so short by evolutionary standards. And after crunching all the data, it became very clear there was no other answer but technology to explain how that occurred. Various technologies, but how that occurred. And so why would technology's influence on our evolution, both genotype and phenotype, be restricted if you can think? Our longevity, our vibrancy, our health is such a big thing. It's a very complicated thing. If it can influence that, what else is it influencing? What other things are technologies, and particularly really engaging technologies, doing to our sense of well-being? And so it strikes me, Revenge of the Nerds, it strikes me that we've come upon a time in which certain kinds of characteristics, certain kinds of human characteristics are no longer things that we need to select against. So now it no longer hurts your ability to reproduce, if that's the objective, certainly from an evolutionary biology standpoint. It no longer hurts your ability to reproduce if you're not so good socially. If you're not as good at reading social cues in this generation, you probably are not going to have a huge problem finding a mate and having a kid. And that's been the case for a while. And in fact, our society has increasingly shifted to valuing our ability to process and interact with machines versus our ability to process and interact with each other, which is one of the characteristics of people with autism spectrum disorder. It's a response to that. So those people who are able to do better with machines and process with their brains technology, math, and that kind of interaction have some sort of advantage in our world today. And so it seems to me like these things put together, these technology pressures, particularly the power of games, are producing this interesting evolutionary step. And those people who have this new capability, who have this new and different characteristic, are not to be medicalized. It's not a pathology. It's the future of people. And they're already walking among us. There's no ignoring the evidence for those of you with a young child. There's no ignoring the evidence of their kind of intuitive connection with technology and that increasing kind of funnel and pressure that we put them on to engage with that technology in early days. This is only intensifying. It's only becoming more serious. This evolutionary step is something that the optimists, the writers, the visionaries have talked about for a long time. And I think for many of you who loved comic books or loved video games as kids, you had sort of hoped that if we had a human evolutionary step in our lifetime, that those people would have like superpowers. I think we could all agree. It would be really cool. And they'd be really easy to spot because they'd be flying above us and turning water into ice. But I posit that this is actually happening and it is a kind of superpower. And that superpower is manifesting itself every day. What's interesting to me about this particular evolution from the millennial generation forward is that for many folks, particularly older folks, the millennials and this tight gamer influenced generation is something that they just don't understand. It's something that's producing a lot of friction. And yet, it's suggested that this particular generation doesn't have problems as much as these particular generations have strengths. And they're demonstrating those strengths by running rings around the established order all the time. And those rings are showing up in ever more increasing frequency the more and more that we look. And it poses a real challenge for those of us not on that side of the fence, those of us perhaps a little bit older, already established in our jobs and industry. Google the phrase managing millennials, for example. I know many of you are quite young, many of you are in the millennial generation, but you have to know that many older folks, people more my age and even older, are having a lot of, shall we say, ennui about managing millennials. Just for your own edification, Google it and see all the frustration people. Millennials are so hard to manage. They need constant positive reinforcement. They're never happy with anything. They think they're entitled to everything. And I look at that and I'm like, so you're taking the smartest, fastest thinking, most technologically literate, most socially connected, most ethically grounded generation in history, dismissing them because you can't figure out how to manage them the way they need to be managed. Let me tell you what will happen if you can't figure out how to make an environment that's engaging to them. They'll leave and start competitors. Because there's nothing holding that generation and their younger cohort to working in major corporations. Similarly, from the marketing standpoint, if you don't make your products and services engaging enough, if you don't think about them the way this intensively changed new human thinks about marketing and product experiences, you too will lose them. Take this case study. A few months ago, a major car maker came to me, one of the world's largest car makers, and said, Gabe, we have a problem. I was like, okay, what's your problem? And they were like, kids don't want to drive anymore. For the first time since the introduction of the automobile, the interest of teenagers in driving in the United States is on the decline. This has never been seen before. And there's lots of different research, and I said, why? Let's look at the research. And the reasons that are cited are the environment, which the millennial and younger generations, this gamer generation, really concerned with. The cost of driving a car, also prominent in people's minds. But the main reason, according to this automaker's research, was that kids can't Instagram and tweet while they're behind the wheel. I'm not kidding you. So instead of not Instagramming, they're not driving. Let's put that into perspective. If you had told me 5 years ago that some photo sharing app was going to undo 5 generations of intrinsic, like built-in American personality and behavior, the connection between Americans and their cars, between teenage Americans and their cars, right? Think about this indoctrination that you get as a teenager. If you had told me that Instagram was going to kill the car, I'd have laughed at you. But the writing's on the wall. People will give up things that are so dear to them in pursuit of pleasure and positive reinforcement. They go where the pleasure is. It's a sort of hedonistic principle. And to the old canard of violence in video games, you know, every time some terrible tragedy happens, and often in between, a debate erupts about the effect of video games on violence. And even if you choose to ignore all the studies that say that games do not generate violence in people who are naturally not predisposed to violence, we can also all agree that games are excellent training tools. And so if you are predisposed to violence and you like to use video games, you probably have gotten a fair amount of education on how to do that. Now, let me ask you this. If we're going to have this argument about games and violence in society, what are you going to do? Ban games? You need to get rid of them? You're going to shove that back in the box? Maybe the more pertinent question should be, how are you going to defend yourself against somebody who spent 10 or 20,000 hours training on how to commit violence when they decide that they want to? Your police officers, your army lieutenants do not have the same amount of training that a 16-year-old boy playing video games has in terms of total number of hours. And they never will. They'll retire from the police force without ever seeing that much action, as you will in 4 or 5 years of violent video game play. The only way to do that, the only way to do it, whether it's that sort of, I know that was a little heavy, okay, but, right? I understand, but I think we have to have this conversation. We have to have it. People are too polarized about this. We have to have the real conversation, right? And no matter what it is, you're not putting this game genie back in the box. You're not going to do it. So what you have to do, no matter where you sit in the ecosystem, is level the playing field. Changing this next generation consumer, this next generation human, is less powerful of a strategy and less effective of a strategy, as I'll argue and I'll show you, as making the thing that you do, the position that you're trying to advocate for, whether that's your business, society, the government, your nonprofit, or even your safety, more game-like. And so we arrive at this topic called gamification. And the way that we think about gamification is the process of engaging users and changing behavior using the best ideas from games, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics. It's a way of leveling the playing field. It's a way of bringing the best ideas from games to this thing that you're doing, which maybe isn't games, and leveraging that to create the kind of engagement that you need to change that sort of behavior. In looking at the research, we found that there were 3 characteristics that a system had to have in order to be engaging, particularly to this next generation of consumer. It had to have feedback, friends, and fun. And the more feedback, friends, and fun that a system has, the more effective it is at changing people's behavior. Feedback, friends, and fun. These are the characteristics. And although, you know, much of this evolutionary shift that I've been talking about is something that I think rests below our observable level, so it's not something that most of us are kind of keenly aware of, I think. We don't feel like there's a next human walking among us. It turns out that sort of intuitively, many businesses have actually been talking to this new consumer and designing for this new consumer. And it's an interesting kind of case study in the free market and the kind of profit motive, and how in response to pressure, some organizations have stepped it up and figured out a way to leverage gamification even before, and take leadership even before there was like clear evidence to support this. So one of those examples, certainly on the marketing side, and it's no surprise that marketers are first, right? Because they're the first people to say, hey, our ads are not working the way they should anymore. People are not paying attention to our messages anymore. Everyone knows that our social media marketing is fake. So one of the most interesting case studies for this comes from a company called Autodesk, which many of you are familiar with as a creator of high-end 3D modeling software. And they have, like many software makers, a free-to-play kind of free trial version, after which you can buy a paid version. Autodesk realized that people were getting all excited. I'm going to do 3D modeling, right? It's really cool. I want to make 3D stuff. And they would download the trial version of the product, fully featured, industry standard product. And then people would get confused and stop using it and therefore never buy the product. So they said, we have to have a better way. We've got to connect with this new consumer in a new way and come up with a way to get them to buy this product. And so what they did was they gamified the free trial of their 3D modeling software. They created quests which are inspired by Carmen Sandiego, even though I don't know that they would say that publicly, where basically you have to solve puzzles for each feature of the product. So you're traveling through the world and solving a kind of puzzle as you go. And to solve each puzzle, you've got to learn a basic element of the product, like how to model something, how to rotate a model, how to light something. So all these different features. And through this process, Autodesk has raised total time in its trial versions by 40% and increased revenue by 15%. They've increased sales. The seat of their software goes for $3,500. So a 15% increase is not an insignificant number. Would be significant at any company, but it's particularly jarring in that context. And that's by creating these opportunities to connect with consumers in a way that's more meaningful. Or another kind of fun example, this time from the pizza chain Domino's. Domino's built this game called Pizza Hero. And in this game, which is available for your iOS devices and also Android devices, you play a pizzaiolo or a pizzaiola, someone who makes pizzas. You have to learn how to knead the dough, spin the dough up, get the ingredients, put them on. Once you've mastered how to do that, you can actually submit your pizza to be baked at your local Domino's. So as an output of this game, you can say, hey, make this for me, and then they bake it and deliver you the pizza that you made through this game. And if you're especially good at it, Domino's will invite you to apply for a job at the company making pizzas, which of course is amusing. But this is a real business problem. This is a company that's got to hire a lot of people every year, big turnover. In the first 7 weeks of the product rollout, hundreds of thousands of people played Domino's Pizza Hero, and it resulted in millions of dollars worth of incremental revenue to the company. They've been a little bit more mum on the number of employees they've hired as a result of it. But nonetheless, a really, really interesting case study. But the use of gamification isn't isolated to marketing. Other companies taking a leadership position, thinking about this next generation of consumers, have started to apply these principles to human resources and to the enterprise and to business process. And one of those is IBM, which built a business process management platform called Innovate, off of which they developed a couple of games that make use of this BPM concept. And one of those games, by example, is called City Manager. And it's kind of a sim city for people who actually run cities. So if you're really a city manager, it's the kind of thing you might play. Today, IBM's little game experiment, this little game that IBM has put out on the web, is the #1 lead generator for the IBM Corporation worldwide, is this game that they put on the website. The Innovate platform. Pretty cool stuff. It's actually a lot of fun. Or, take as an example, Plantville from the German engineering company Siemens, which most of you I'm sure are familiar with. So, Siemens built this game called Plantville, in which you run a plant or factory or some kind of facility like that. The crazy part about Plantville is right now, as we're talking, something like 20 or 25,000 people are playing Plantville, of which the majority are people who run plants for a living. So just to put this into perspective, you go to your job running a factory all day until 6 o'clock, then you come home, take your pants off, grab a sandwich, and sit down and play Plant Manager all night long until you go to bed. It sounds a little crazy, right? It sounds a little crazy until you start putting this into context. And you start remembering, some of you may have seen during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, news reports ran these stories about soldiers would go out, do a sortie, come back to base, take a shower, sit down and play war games. Some of you may have seen that in the news. This is a kind of similar phenomenon. The basic idea is that whatever it is that you do for a job, you go into that job with really big expectations about what your career is going to hold. You have a fantasy about what that job is. And then once you get into it day to day, your reality is more narrow. But you were in it because you had a real passion for that thing. And you still maybe want to play with it. Take this example. So let's say you're the nuclear plant manager, right? Playing Plantville. Every day you come to your job at this nuclear plant. You come in every day hoping that today is not the day that the plant melts down. But you kind of hope it is. Just a little bit, right? But it would be terrible if it was. But it would be kind of awesome. But it would also be horrifying and really good. It's complicated, right? You train your whole life as a nuclear plant manager for that meltdown. You've trained and trained and trained and trained. You've done all the training, mostly on paper. It would be bad if that happened. But also, it would be kind of cool to test your limits, to know what you're capable of doing, to actually see yourself in that context. But again, the use of gamification by leading edge businesses isn't limited to marketing or HR. To address this next generation of challenges in this next consumer, companies are also using it in a strategic way. Take, for example, the United Kingdom's Department of Work and Pensions. It alone is the single biggest part of the UK government in terms of budget spend. They account for 28% of the total budget of the UK, just this one department. And they were looking for ways of optimizing their business and ways of improving the way that they work. So they launched this concept called Idea Street, which is a stock market for ideas. Anyone in the company can propose a concept, and then people buy and sell shares in that idea just like in the stock market to rank them. In the first 90 days, Idea Street generated over 1,400 different concepts, different ideas that were vetted by the market, and saved them £30 million in cost savings just from the launch of that idea, demonstrating how you can do it. And when we talk about the civil service, it's not usually like idea-rich environment in which we're operating, so it's particularly challenging. Or another example that I really like comes from the University of Washington, a project called Foldit. And some of you might be familiar with this, but basically the premise is, in order to do advanced disease intervention or drug discovery, we have to be able to understand the small protein structures of the world around us, like DNA and RNA. But we can't actually do that under a microscope because we don't have microscopes that can see the structure clearly. So we do it through a process of folding, where we model them out and then use math models to figure out whether it's accurate or not. Now, the process of folding is very time-consuming, and it turns out that machines are not very good at protein folding because they're not very good at divining symmetry without making mistakes. They're not terrible, but they're not great. Humans, on the other hand, are intuitively quite good at this function. They're very good at finding symmetry in things. So researchers at the University of Washington took their machine learning protein folding product called Rosetta and built a human-based protein folding game called Foldit on top of it. And Foldit had a colossal breakthrough just a little over a year ago. Scientists had been working for 15 years to solve this elemental protein structure in the fight against HIV. 15 years they've been stumped. And Foldit players, 49,000 people playing Foldit, solved that protein structure in 10 days that had stopped people for 15 years. Now, what's super cool about it is not that you can get a community of people to engage in a challenge, because you can certainly do that. You've seen that. You have Spaceship One hanging in your foyer. You know that you can get communities of people engaged in a challenge. What's particularly exciting about the Foldit example is that 50% of the people who played Foldit had no math or science background whatsoever. They did this tough math and science problem without actually knowing how to do it, without ever having received training for it. And it's a very, very interesting case study. When you give people a sense of purpose and you build a game that's engaging or fun, you can activate that smarter, better, faster element of this evolving consumer. Or take the example of Nike. So many of you are familiar with Nike Plus, a combination hardware and software device that enables us to track our movement. When Nike Plus was first conceived in 2004, Nike was not the top choice for hardcore runners. They were the second or third shoe of choice for a hardcore runner. New Balance and Asics were much more popular with the hardcore runner. And Nike, seeing the trend of mobile technology, built Nike Plus, which allows us to keep track of how we do. Today, 5 million people will use Nike Plus to track their performance. And what it's done is it's changed the meaning of being a sportswear and apparel company. It's changed what Nike is fundamentally in a strategic way from the bottom up. It used to be a company that sold footwear and shirts and shorts and pants. And today, for those 5 million people and the people who join Nike Plus and buy the Fuel Band every single day, Nike's a wish fulfillment company. Nike is a business, Nike is a brand that helps you get where you want to go in life, for real. Not just in advertising, not just in Mad Men language, but for real, every day, every step you take along your way, while you're sweating, while you're aching. Nike is there, pushing you on, urging you forward, telling you to do better. They fulfill your dreams of being who you want to be. And oh, by the way, they sell some shoes and apparel. But the writing's on the wall. The future for that business is as a software company, not as a hardware company. And this is at the heart, these examples and the dozens of others that we talk about in the gamification revolution was why I wrote this book. While so many people are sitting around arguing about whether or not the millennials can be managed and trying to figure out whether or not we can adapt to the challenges of the future, some businesses already are. And they're using gamification and those principles to gain a strategic competitive advantage over others. They're dominating markets. They're transforming the definition of their businesses, and some nonprofits and governments as well, as you've seen, by using these concepts of gamification. We also built, so that's the contents of my book, and we also built, for the book, the world's first gamified social reading application called Read Social, which you can download for free if you get a copy of the book, and see a new way of engaging with this content. So for many people, the concept of gamification was a sort of tactical idea. It's like, oh, we've got this little engagement problem we need to solve. So let's put some game frosting on it. Let's sprinkle a little game sugar on it. Let's get it more gamey, and then the problems will magically solve themselves. And the point of this gamification revolution, the point of the book and the point of this work, is to highlight that this has ceased to be a tactical environment. This has started to be a strategic environment, one in which companies that acknowledge this new consumer gain a significant advantage. And so one of the most frequent questions, of course, in all that I've been talking about, I've been only talking about these younger generation, this next evolution of humanity. But it turns out, and this is the bonus for all of us, the techniques in gamification work just as well on older people. They're just not begging for it. They're not sitting around arguing that it needs to happen. It's this new gamer generation that's on the forefront, that's pushing it forward, the ones that are disconnecting from the existing experiences. But everything that we do for them, we can also do for the older generations, and that's just a big bonus. So as we look forward, as I look forward over the next few years and look at this shift in society, it strikes me that what we all need to do is we all need to start connecting with this idea that the next human is here. They walk among us now. Many of you are them, and some of you have them as children. They're a new kind of person with a new and special skill. They're intimately connected to the technologies that many of you have built, and our parents built, and the world delivered. They've adapted based on those technologies from the kind of people that we were to the kind of people that we will be. And we stand in between two kinds of humans. One based on the old model where technology was a nice to have, and one based on the new model where technology is the context through which we interact with ourselves and with each other. And in the context of this inescapable conclusion for me, we find that it's necessary for us to start, I think, embracing this idea, internalizing the notion of how we connect with that particular consumer, that next person, that next member of society, whatever they may be. And to remember that while we may think of some of them as needing our help, needing our assistance, needing medicine, needing remediation, needing their support, maybe it's us that needs the help. Maybe it's the slow, gray world that we come from into the bright, shiny, feedback, friends, and fun-filled world that we're entering that's the one that needs to be fixed, the one that needs to be helped. And so I hope that this will be something that all of us can feel is a potential opportunity for you in your business, for you in your career, for the world that we live in, and that you'll join me in this amazing, amazing journey as we gamify the world. Thank you.
So one of the things that always interests me is keeping users motivated, particularly in algorithms wrapping a human into it. What are some of the ways that you've seen that people are using motivational systems to keep users engaged for long terms without any kind of cliff at the end where they just lose interest and stop playing the game?
So it's not possible to design an experience that is a perpetual motion machine for engagement. We don't have the ability to write one set of code that will forever be interesting to people, because one of the characteristics of people, not even this new generation of consumer that I've been talking about, but all people, is that we quickly habituate to stimuli. So just so that we can put the science into context, it just came out, research was published recently, I think in Science, and they wrote it up in the New York Times. So they said that the average romantic relationship between people, spends 2 years in a state of romantic affection, okay? And then after about 2 years, switches to become companionship affection. So we stop waking up every day going, oh my God, my partner is so amazing, and start waking up every day and going, okay, we got to take the kids to school, and let's get on, I'm glad this person is here, and right? So romance shifts to companionship. Now, many couples, when they encounter that transition, they feel badly about themselves, because they're like, oh, I somehow failed in this, right? My relationship is no longer as hot and fresh and exciting as it was before. The science behind that is called habituation. And all of your human senses, your brain is wired to eventually habituate to stimuli. That is to say, to normalize stimuli. Think about why that's important evolutionarily, right? Like a really bad smell. If you didn't habituate to it, but it was perpetual, you'd go crazy. Kind of background noise. If you don't learn how to habituate to that kind of background noise, you'd go crazy. Like right now, if a caveman was unfrozen and became a lawyer and showed up here, they would note, it's an SNL joke, they would note that there was a loud hum in the room, like a very loud machine hum, because they had never heard that before. We don't hear it anymore, because we've habituated to it, but it's all around you all the time, right? So, habituation is the enemy of long-term engagement design. Every time a stimulus is presented, and it's presented over and over again, eventually people become immune to it. One technique is to do what's called operant conditioning, which is slot machine effect, right? If you can never predict the reward, ever, in any way, and you can't predict its timing or its size or its frequency, then in theory, you'll be forever like pressing the pedal trying to get that thing to happen. But people even find that disturbing, right? So the key is, whatever you're going to do to design long-term engagement for users requires you to design it in the long term. Design an early, middle, and late game. Continue to invest in it, continue to evolve it over time. There are clearly some games like Nike Plus which continue to be played over the long term. World of Warcraft is played over the long term. But make no mistake that those are continuously being expanded. Those are continuously being evolved. They're always being changed and updated. Hi.
Thank you for your talk today.
Thank you for being here.
I have basically two questions. So the first one is, are there any types of problems where you would not encourage to use gamification to solve them? And the second one is around the mechanics of gamification.
Okay.
What are the good sources? Maybe, I'm not sure, I just bought your book. I'm not sure if you talk about it in the book. What are the components of a gamification strategy? What are the attributes and how to combine them to gamify a problem?
So your second question, we'll do the mechanics first. So there is a kind of methodology that I've laid out in Gamification by Design, which kind of steps through how we gamify something. And I don't think that there's one cookie cutter actual set of mechanics that you can use. I don't think we could say, we could do A, then B, then C. We can't build a repeating kind of algorithm to make gamification work every time. Because in practice, whenever we do that, it ends up becoming kind of boring. So everyone has the same thing, and then nobody cares about it anymore, and so you have to kind of be original, but you can use a methodology to go about a process of designing gamification. And it probably won't surprise you to know that we use gamification to design gamification. So it's like a little meta, but a lot of fun. And if you get a chance, I do them live workshops. I do them in the books. Also, we have some online resources that you can follow to help you. So visit gamification.co. It's got some great resources for the mechanics. The second question, like situations where we don't use or shouldn't use gamification or where it doesn't work. So I get asked this question a lot, and I usually give one answer, but I want to give you a different answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, why not? All right, so here's the thing. I've tried to kind of express this probably a couple of different ways today, so I just want to go back to it for a second. I don't really think that there's any situation in which we shouldn't be thinking about how to gamify it, because every single idea, concept, product, business in the world lives or dies by its consumer engagement. Everything. I tend to describe it as a last mile problem. It is the last mile problem of every idea, especially in technology. You've got a great concept, an amazing product, right? Just like the other 5 million people here in the Valley, coming up with their great ideas, launching their products. And where do they all end up failing? They all end up failing because they're not able to get user adoption, right? That's where we have the last mile part. It's not we don't have great ideas, because we have lots of great ideas. It's that we don't have methods for actually getting people to do that thing. And no matter how good our ideas are, if people don't do that thing, then our idea isn't worth squat. It turns out that engagement, behavior change itself, is actually, I think, the currency on which companies are priced. So the more businesses are able to change behavior, and the more you in your own career are able to touch your examples of behavior change, the more people will pay for you. That's what they're paying for. You can call it like traffic, but the discussion is shifting from traffic to engagement. And that's the currency of the coin of the realm, if you will. So gamify everything. And probably you won't have a choice. P.S. That's the other piece of it, which is, this next consumer isn't going to care unless the experience has feedback, friends, and fun. They're just not going to care. Just ignore it. Oh, this doesn't have enough fun in it, so I'm not going to do it. And I don't care how good it is for me or how good it is for the world. It's got to have feedback, friends, and fun.
My question is, I do a lot of coaching, and they've kind of trained us to do games in the practicing. So we play baseball, and instead of just playing catch with them, you have this game. So they designed this game, we're running this game. So my question is, the game I didn't realize was so exciting by the players. But how do you, have you things we need to watch for on so the goal is to make sure they play well in the game, the actual game, not the practice game. Do I need to watch out for, there's a lot of feedback in that practice game we do for ground balls, but will it, translate into when they have their game? Because baseball is kind of slow. You have it's a one-person kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But when we play this game, it's like they're so active and they're cheering on each other. But in the game, you're kind of,
So there's a lot of interesting research on how to design feedback loops for optimal outcomes, and there's no clear answer for how to do that. There's not one ring to rule them all when it comes to how to design a feedback loop for users. It's really optimal.
One of the question is, so we're getting the feedback in the game practicing.
Yeah.
But in the actual, when we want them to perform.
What's the purpose of a practice game?
So it's not a practice game. It's just this, for the ground balls, they kind of line up and we throw ground balls to them and they get points and they go.
Why?
They find it fun. And
You're doing it because they find it fun, or are you doing it because that will improve their performance?
We want them to improve their performance in the actual game.
Okay.
So I wonder, in the game it's so slow, in the actual game it's so slow, they may not even get the chance to actually catch a ground ball.
Right.
So they perform lower in the real situation.
Yeah. So a couple of quick things. One is, if you're going to design a proxy experience for people, so let's say you're designing a simulator to simulate being a pilot. Many of you have seen those aircraft simulators, right, on TV or movies. Some of you have probably been in one. It's kind of awesome. I really want to go in one. So that simulator has to be super realistic. That simulator cannot be partially realistic. It can't suffer from what's called the uncanny valley, which some of you might know from game design, where you get something that looks and feels a lot like reality, but then isn't reality. So you sit there spending a lot of your energy figuring out, is it real or isn't it, instead of just being in the experience or constantly being pulled in and out. So if you build a simulator to simulate the experiences that somebody's supposed to have in real life, and that simulator is better than real life, why do you think that people will want to do the thing in real life as much as they would want to do the simulator, right? So that's a genuine issue. It's similar to the nuclear plant manager thought example that I gave you earlier, which is you do this exciting training thing, and then the actual thing is sort of boring. So one piece of advice I would give is make baseball more exciting. We could all benefit from that, if that's within your power to do. If it's not within your power to do, I would look for ways to make that simulation more like actual baseball, and maybe put people on different tracks depending on their actual skill level. So if they're more highly skilled and more highly motivated, maybe they will be fine doing the high-speed practice because they're being driven to play that other game a different way, versus your kind of average player or below average player, for whom as soon as the attention kind of shifts out of they drop out of attention, they're not going to be engaged anymore. And I'd like to see your new baseball 2.0. I might even play it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of enterprise gamification, what are the most common stumbling blocks you've seen maybe in your consulting work where where do things go wrong or where do they fail?
So the biggest mistake that companies make all the time, this happens all the time. So it's like a company will be like, all right, well, we want to gamify an employee interaction because we're trying to gain, improve throughput, improve outcomes, whatever. So my first question to them is always like, how are you going to get them to use it? Because 4/5 of enterprise software implementations fail, more or less. So how are you going to get people to use this thing? And typically, especially if it's HR driven, the company will say, well, they're going to have to, right? So by fiat, that's the method for delivering new software. And the truth is, people don't like being told what to do. It doesn't matter how fun the game is. If I preface my gamified solution by saying, you must play this game, you're probably going to be like, no, not so much, right? So that's, I think, a really big mistake. We have to make enterprise engagement designed to the same standards as consumer engagement. You'd never try to get your customers to do something like that. Why get your employees to do something like that? And the more we start to realize, and I talk about this in the kind of evolution of this consumer point, that same person who's just as distracted by their smartphone at home, who can't watch, crazy stat, the last month, 80% of the American population has watched television with the second or third screen open while watching, right? Now, it wasn't that long ago that TV was the distraction, and now we need a distraction from the distraction just to feel like our brains are functioning, right? Are you frustrated at the movies when you go that you can't open your phone? I am. I think about it all the time. It's like, I want to pull my phone out and do something, but I have to just watch this movie. So set against that backdrop, why would employees suddenly not become normal humans when they walk through the door of work? What is it about the walking through the doorway at the office that suddenly makes them not distracted, that suddenly makes them not hedonistic, that suddenly makes them not want to follow feedback, friends, and fun? Nothing. P.S. So historically, we've depended on this. We've all been part of this a shared delusion that the office is somehow not like the free market for people's attention. And in practice, it's no different. So to build successful enterprise gamification, you have to start thinking about your employees as consumers, think about them in the same context as consumers, and design that experience with that same idea in mind.
Hi, my question is, can you use gamification to actually reduce engagement, like to addictions or products like that, which you actually would like to
in
avoid?
fact, one of the two of the most successful examples of gamification are Alcoholics Anonymous and Weight Watchers, both of which are behavior cessation games. And in fact, Weight Watchers employs a fair number of game designers to tweak the design of it. And they're two of the most successful behavior cessation systems in the world. They have many of the same kind of core design principles of the other gamified examples that we've talked about. So they've got points, and they've got badges, and they have levels, and they've got achievements and some degree of leaderboards. So they've got all the mechanics. But what makes them especially powerful is that they're all about helping people achieve mastery. And anytime you design your experience, something gamified, we spend a lot of time talking about helping people achieve mastery, how gamification drives mastery. And the more you're able to drive mastery in people, the more loyalty they give you, the more control they give you, the more confidence they impart in your system. So basically, if you give somebody the power of mastery over something that they want to control, they're loyal to you forever. So consider this. You run into somebody on the street, you haven't seen them in 5 years. You're like, oh my God, you look amazing. You've lost so much weight, you look amazing. Right? They turn to you and they're like, oh yeah, I did it at Weight Watchers. Right? How'd you do it? Weight Watchers. But it's not Weight Watchers. You actually had to do diet and exercise. The person did the work. They did the work, the same work that everybody else does. They just used Weight Watchers as the system to do it. When a system delivers mastery, people will replace their sense of self-accomplishment with the system as the identity. They do that all the time. That's its kind of loyalty side. So you can change behavior when people want to change their behavior by using those systems. Now, if your question was whether can you force people to change their behavior, it depends on whether or not you believe people have free will. If you believe they have free will, then you cannot force them to do anything, right? If you don't believe they have free will, then you can certainly force them to do certain things.
So segueing from addiction, all of these seem to be about moving people who aren't already sort of addicted to this gamification process into this process. What do you do when people's limited engagement is sort of maxed out on all these things we've built these feedback cycles for? Like, how do you make them do foldit instead of more cow tipping on Facebook?
Well, I think it's an arms race, right? So just like everything else that you have to do, any other kind of behavior change or user engagement system, over time they lose their efficacy and you have to overcome their habituation. Thankfully today, the market is more wide open than you would think. Even in writing Gamification Revolution, where we were researching and looking at these companies that were really doing this strategically, that were really, crushing the competition with gamification, there's not that many examples. It's not like we had like 500 examples to choose from. We didn't have that many where they're really doing it that well. So one of the things about gamification is it's a relatively new trend with pretty deep roots. And because we're in the tech business, we've heard the term for 3 years, and we're like, oh, everyone's doing it. But look around Google, right? How much of it is actually being done? Some of it is like conceptual and people want to do it. Sometimes we've dipped our toe in the water somewhere, but not that many companies are actually doing it, deliberately doing it, purposefully doing it. So the market is still fairly open in most categories. And I would say even in categories where gamification's been particularly successful, like the wellness category, I challenge you to find a wellness startup in the last 2 years that isn't a gamification-based wellness startup. It's hard to find one. Even in the wellness category, like the best performer, Nike Plus, arguably, or Runkeeper, Fitbit, one of those, none of them are A pluses, right? Not to be critical, but none of them have knocked it out of the ballpark. Like Nike Plus is great, but it's 5 million people, but it's 5 million people. It's not 500 million people. 5 million, right? So we still have work to do. We still got a long way to go. I won't stand up here and tell you that I have all the answers. What I have is clarity that there's a real challenge. And it's going to require the effort of all people doing whatever it is that they're doing to lean in to actually make that a reality. Thanks, Steve. Awesome. Thank you all so much. And if you want, if you're a Twitter person, you can chat with me on Twitter. I'm at Gabe Zichermann. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you.